cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You go to emailrevealer.com, you get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You get an autographed copy of the book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. Or you can get the book over at Amazon.com if you want it quicker and you don't want it autographed. Also, too, if you got anything like you think your wife's cheating on you, you think your husband's cheating on you, my advice always, the first step in any kind of infidelity investigation is an online infidelity investigation, which is something I invented. You give us their email address, and we trace it back to online dating websites to catch them registered to dating sites or online websites, personal ad sites, stuff like that.
Your guest is here.
Thank you very much, Danny. A couple of things before we get to our guest. I want to apologize for last week's guest. Okay, last week was a nightmare. Oh, my God. We still don't know what happened to our friend there that was supposed to come on. As you know, he was a former bank robber and involved in this white supremacist priesthood. So maybe he went back to he came out of prison. So maybe he's back in prison. We don't quite know what happened with him. And also, too, I want to apologize for last night. We had a little internet glitch, and we lost about 15 minutes of the show. Not 15 minutes, about 10 minutes of the show. But if that does happen, guys, just stay calm. Don't panic. You don't have to start messaging me on Facebook and sending me Skype messages and stuff. And all, mention in the chat room. I'll be fine. And we'll get to the show. We'll pick it up right where we left off. Okay. I want to introduce our guest. We have here Kathryn MacDonald. She's been on our show once before.
How you doing, Ed?
Hey, good, Kathryn. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to tell the audience that you were on last year, a couple of years back, and for some reason we only did a 1 hour show. I was expecting to do a 2 hour show. So if people want to get a little filler to this show, go back and listen to the first show and fill in some of the blanks here. So Kathryn MacDonald, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Tell us about yourself. Who is Kathryn MacDonald?
I am my career has been as a drama teacher. I've spent my life doing theater and working with animals and kids, and then as of late, I'm married to Jeffrey MacDonald, Jeff MacDonald. No one really calls him Jeffrey except one friend I can think of, and life has taken some interesting turns, but I am grateful for them.
Yeah, I could imagine. It must be a tough road, being married, having a relationship with someone who's 3 life sentences. Am I correct?
3 consecutive life sentences.
Yeah, that's a tough road. So now you're still doing the acting teaching, the drama teaching, stuff like that?
I do peripherally. Excuse me. I don't have a dedicated location at this time, but I did for almost 20 years. Okay,
and how long have you been married to Jeff?
Almost 15 years.
15 years, okay. And how did you meet Jeff originally?
Well, as I said, I've been, in the theater and like that, and during, if anyone's not familiar with, they're probably not the timeline of this case, from 1970 to 79, Jeff was a free citizen, and he was practicing medicine in Long Beach. He was on the cutting edge of emergency medicine, and coincidentally, I was as a young teen, 14, 15, 16, all those years during the bicentennial years, I was in a musical review that started here in Maryland, and we entertained at all kinds of functions, including big ballroom things where they had guest speakers and like that, and we were the entertainment. And my father was a commercial realtor, which was worked for himself, which was very cutting edge at the time, and he drove me to a lot of the performances, especially if there were potential investors there, and there was a performance at John's at a big hotel in Baltimore. I don't remember the name of it, but I was probably 14 or 15, and Johns Hopkins, had rented this ballroom, and Jeff was the keynote speaker on child abuse and emergency rescue techniques that he had developed. And after the show, I came out, and my dad was, introduced me to a bunch of people he was standing talking to, and I remember shaking his hand, and he said, "You did a good job." And that was kind of it until, he was much older than me, of course, and I must say, Ed, when I'm in a good mood, I say, he never invested in any of my father's real estate deals. I'm kind of ticked off,
So you were like a teenage singer and dancer in a show?
I'm joking.
Huh? You were like a teenage singer and dancer in a show?
Yes, it was called A Musical Tribute to America, and we performed it for Jimmy Carter. We performed it the Tomorrowland stage, the opening act of the Tomorrowland stage in Walt Disney World in Florida. We traveled all over the country for like 7 years. It was a magnificent experience, and this is just a chance meeting. But after that, of course, my father, kept up on with. We had no idea there was anything legal going on in his life.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, Hillary. How old were you at that time when the first meeting?
I was just shaking his hand. I would say 14.
14 years old. And now, were you aware at all that he was having any kind of legal troubles?
No.
Okay. Why don't we pause here for a second and explain to the audience exactly what were these the tragedy that happened in Jeff MacDonald's life that caused him to get arrested?
You mean what's in February 17th, 1970?
Yeah, the attack on his home there, and the murders in his home, and let's get into that. Let's lay a foundation, a basis for what we're discussing here today.
Of course. Well, almost 47 years ago to the day, or more than that now, Jeff had worked all day at moonlighting at another hospital and so forth, and his wife Colette, and they had 2 young daughters, almost 3 and almost 6, Kristen and Kimberly, and they lived on post at Fort Bragg. Jeff had volunteered for the Army when there was a draft going on, and his job there, besides being a captain in an Army doctor, was to counsel those who came back from Vietnam and were hooked on drugs. And that was rampant, of course. Post was open at the time, meaning that anyone could walk in and out anytime they wanted. It wasn't guarded. And he came home from his moonlighting job at Hamlet Hospital, and his wife Colette had gone to night school at night, and they had shared a liqueur. And she went to bed, and he decided to watch some television, and then and read a book on the couch in the little apartment. And then he decided to go to bed. When he went to go to bed, found that his younger daughter, Kristen, who was, like I said, almost 3, had wet the bed where he lay. And so he picked Kristen up and put her in her bed. And he didn't want to awaken Colette, who was 5 months pregnant with her 3rd child. And he just took a blanket and went out to the couch and fell asleep reading, I think it was Mickey Spillane, something like that, a novel of some kind. And it was a very rainy night, and at some point, somewhere between 2:30 and 3:30, or around that time, on the morning of February 17th, he was awakened from a sound sleep on this little sofa in the living room by 4 intruders. And he tried to wake up, and there's 4 strangers in his house, and he took note of as best he could, and he got up and said, "What are you doing in my house?" And he uses some expletives, which anyone would do, of course. And then he saw a woman with long, stringy blonde, wet hair and a floppy hat and what they called go-go boots back in the day. They were glistening like they were wet, and he said he remembered her either holding a candle or a light of some kind, something enchanting. And it was almost like it was a dream. And then he's set upon by there were 3 males there, at least 3 males, but one was a white male who was short in stature, with sandy blonde hair, and then there was an African American man who had an E6 sergeant stripe jacket on and a baseball bat, and they set upon him and started beating him and knifing him. They were stabbing him with a knife and an ice pick, and he pulled his pajama top got pulled over his head. He was like kind of, as he's explained it to many times, warded off these intruders with apparently what's popular in hockey that they do that. They ward people off with the tops at times. So he had this pulled over his head, and this black this man that he could clearly see hit him on the head with a baseball bat until he had a concussion. He was knocked out unconscious, cold on the floor, and he also remembered very sharp stabbings in his body, but he thought, wow, this guy throws a hell of a punch, but he didn't know he was being stabbed or knifed. I mean, it's a bizarre situation. The back door they always left open. They left their doors open all the time, and when he awakened sometime later, his face was flat on the floor in the hallway. He awakened. He always recalls the smell of Johnson's floor wax. To this day, he can't stand that smell because that was the first thing he recalled, and he got up and tried to clear his head a little bit and went looking for his family, and he found his wife, 26-year-old Colette, who had been his high school sweetheart. He'd known her since the 6th grade, brutally murdered, stabbed multiple times, bludgeoned to death. And he tried to give her mouth to mouth, and in some vain attempt, even though he's a doctor and he knew it was fruitless at some moment there, he took his pajama top and covered her body with it to ward off shock or some, who knows how your mind's working in a situation like that. And then he rushed to each of the children, found them in the same condition, and could not resuscitate them. And then he to the bathroom because he felt like he was going to succumb. He was going to go unconscious again himself, and saw how he'd been stabbed, and he had a collapsed lung, as it turns out, and many other injuries and so forth. And then he called the military operator and said, "Send help, we're dying." And that's what happened.
Okay, let's pause there. I got a couple of questions for you. Now, one thing was, he was a Green Beret, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, did he ever travel overseas and see any combat overseas?
No, and as a matter of fact, he was an Army doctor. He was a captain, and he went through paratrooper school. I don't know, there's certain words you conjure up, have a meaning to them. Like Green Beret, you must be like a vigilante justice, fighting machine. Yes, he was fit. He was actually running a weight loss program on base at the time, but he did not see combat, and he was not trained in martial arts or anything like that. And I really think when you're knocked unconscious, which is a proven fact in this case, that Superman couldn't save their family. That's been he couldn't save them. He would have done anything to save them.
Okay, now another question too is the 3-year-old had wet the bed, right? So he takes the 3-year-old back to the 3-year-old's normal bed because the 3-year-old was in the parental bed with the mother, wet the bed. So and I'm a father. This all happens to all of us. So picks up the kid. The kid's wet. You don't want to get into the wet bed. Sometimes you put towels down. You try that. It never quite works out. But you don't want to get in the wet bed. So you put the baby back in their own bed. Now, was this baby wearing a diaper?
I believe so. Like I said, she would have been 3 years old in April, and this happened in February, late February. But my understanding is that she wore diapers to bed, and Jeff did not change her diaper. He got her a bottle of chocolate milk, like a bottle full of chocolate milk, and put her in her bed, and she fell asleep, and he went back out to the couch.
boy, how times have changed, you know? It would be the biggest it would be a bigger crime to give a kid chocolate milk in the middle of the night than it would to actually murder your whole family, you know, which he was convicted of. You know what I mean? Like, people are so correct these days. And also, too, you got to remember, too, back in those days, they had cloth diapers. They didn't have those disposable diapers, so it would have been a cloth diaper. The diaper could have been dry by that time. Okay, very interesting. Okay. Now, you mentioned that he had some injuries. He had a concussion, and he had a punctured lung. Am I correct?
Well, that's an interesting point in that, yes, he had a very severe head contusion, which was and he knew that he testified later that, you know.
Oh, what the hell did I just do? Damn it.
Lung pneumothorax, and he had stab wounds through the fascia of his biceps and arms, and defensive wounds on his hands, and he also had ice pick wounds that to his chest and so forth. He had no scratch marks on him. He had nothing, but interestingly, as these things happen where you start off on a bad foot and never get back on the right one, they not only disposed of the bottoms of the pajamas he was wearing, which matched the top, but they also they never took photos of his injuries. And so if you were to follow this through the 10 years up to the trial, even these Army doctors who treated him, he was rushed to Womack Hospital, and he was in the ICU for 9 days. He had 2 surgeries to repair his lung, and any doctor would tell you that no one would stab themselves. That was what the government started out with. That he stabbed himself because he was a doctor. He'd know how to stab himself without killing himself, which is not true. And that no one would even try it because it was so close to his liver. You could not predict that. It was a very deep wound. But over those years, the Army wore these doctors down, so their testimony kind of, got diluted. Let's put it that way. And so it went from. But we have the medical records, and the fact that they did not take any photographs of his wounds, but the medical records are there, and there's still things that haunt this situation where people are just make up their minds that they think they know something that's not true, and they don't want to know something different. But that is a total myth that he was barely injured while his family was brutally murdered. And I think, and we could go into that later if you care to, but I think that was definitely a huge factor at his trial, was the fact that the jury saw him as, fit and virile, and his family was brutally murdered.
Okay, that's it's interesting to bring that up now. This would be a good time to bring that up because I'll tell you this. When I have a lot of guests on the show, I've interviewed a lot of people. And every now and then you'll have a guest, a controversial topic. And it seems to be that there's an organized group of trolls out there that they're all ready to go. They're really into this case or the story or the people involved. And you can kind of tell by the way they come at you and the way they contact you and the way the writing style is. They're all pretty much saying the same thing, passing around kind of disinformation. Now, you've experienced that. This is a very passionate case. The people who follow this case and comment on this case take this very passionately. Am I correct?
Well, with all due respect, Ed, I don't know if I'd call it that they're passionate. I think they are
crazy.
They have issues. They're not passionate about these.
Yeah.
What they may parade that way, but I've been dealing with this for 20 years now,
right.
And these are people who have problems that they want to take out on someone either they never met, or if they did have some tie to Jeff over these many years, they feel thwarted, or that whatever their issues are, and they don't have anything else going on, so they just won't let go of this. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen these internet people. There may be maybe 8 of them, and they just would write under 100 big they get in a group and they say, okay, we're going to write 100 fake, emails under different names to whoever ran an article about Jeffrey MacDonald, and they're all, of course, horrible. And the people who support him and the people who know he's innocent, including other wrongly convicted people, and some of them, and the most educated lawyers and scientists and criminologists and forensic people in this country, they don't write into things. They don't go in chat rooms. They don't do any of that. So you've got maybe a handful of people who are vocal, and their motives are corrupt. Their motives are not because they care. They never knew Colette, Kim, and Chris. They don't know us. They've never. It's just crazy. And in society, I understand from speaking with you previously that you're aware of this.
Oh yeah,
with your own life.
Oh no, yeah, yeah. Trust me, not just in my own life too, but other guests too. This is a pattern I see with not every single guest, but every now and then you can kind of tell. Guest comes on the show, and there's a pattern of how they come in little groups. Similarly worded emails, how they're emailing me, how they're contacting me. It's an organized trolling,
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and now in this case, it's even a little bit more biased. There's more bias in this case because back in the 70s, they did a TV, what do you call that, a little mini-series, right? It was like a 2-part or a 3-part movie, 3 hours long, with Robert Malden, who was a big star. Andy Griffith was on there. He's another big star. Where they came out with this version of events, this official version of events, and people saw it. It was a big deal when I was a kid and I watched it. It was a lot of people talked about it, and so a lot of people who follow this case come from that information as well, from that TV show.
Well,
yeah,
and I think that is a total tragedy, but it's kind of extremely relevant even at this juncture here with what's going on with the presidency and the press, is that a writer was allowed to, who had Joe McGinnis had a best-selling book in the selling of the president, and then he had 4 failures, and this opportunity was his opportunity to redeem himself. And Jeff was, I can't tell you all the wonderful qualities about him that I could expound upon, but he has a really naive tendency in him that he trusts people, he believes people, he thinks people are good, and I'm the more skeptical one, and he didn't get up with Joe McGinnis, because he wanted to have publicity or anything like that. He needed to pay his lawyers, and believe it or not, even as a highly paid emergency physician, he was out of money, and he needed money to pay his lawyers to go to trial. He'd been 10 years of this, right? And so he hastily and impulsively agreed. He took Joe McGinnis on face value. And if anyone were to research the records, they would know the following. Number one is that not only did Joe McGinnis pretend to be his friend, but that was where the book was, except that the publishers didn't want it that way. It was much more salacious and titillating to think that a man with no history of violence, no motivation, this was a much better story, right, that he's guilty. And so he just kind of turned who Jeff is on its ear as a 180 and painted him out to be some psychotic person, which of course is very ironic given the fact that at his trial, the judge would not allow any psychiatric evidence in from any experts because even though they were trying to say he had a psychotic break with reality. So going back to Fatal Vision for a moment, I think Joe McGinnis just he painted himself out. That's what I get from reading it, and I read it when I was 21 years old, and I didn't know, I had not only, I didn't remember Jeff or anything about him when I read that book. And the miniseries did come out in the mid-'80s. It was the first one, the highest rated of its kind, and people don't realize, it's like, and I mean no disrespect to anyone who's passed away, but not everyone who's passed away is pure and honest and good. People, that's part of life. You come, but we have this idea that someone's dead, you don't say anything about them. And I think in this case, we have a live human being who didn't do anything wrong, who loved his family, and they loved him. And his father-in-law is not even it was Colette's stepfather, not her real father, who he was going to write his own book at the same time. And Joe McGinnis got up with him and convinced the Kassabs, that was Colette's mother and stepfather, not to write their own book, and that he would give them a cut of the profits from Fatal Vision. And then, as you said, with the casting of that movie, Carl Malden, Andy Griffith, Eva Marie Saint, as,
yeah, she was gorgeous, I gotta admit.
It was just like shoved down people's throats, yeah. and for whatever reason, I mean, it has endured, even though the facts have never changed. Jeff has never wavered from his story since day one. Those people existed. They confessed numerous times. They burnt their clothing. They had no alibi for where they were.
Okay, we'll get to that. But first, because we have plenty of time. We got another hour and a half. But Fatal Vision. There was a lawsuit over that movie, the book, correct?
Yes, it was a very groundbreaking suit because Jeff was in federal prison, and a friend of his who is an attorney, the lovely Donna Koch, she kind of had this brainstorm about why don't you sue him for breach of contract, because he lied. He promised to tell the truth, and he didn't. That's what it was about.
And he was awarded, I think, $300,000?
It was $350,000, and the irony there is that it was a jury. One juror refused to vote because she was a member of an animal advocacy group, and I love animals, but she apparently was mad at some of the other jurors because they wouldn't read her pamphlets or something like that, and refused to break. There was going to be a mistrial. And so Jeff was facing either coming up with some money to have another trial or just settling out of court. And, of course, if you want to hear another version of it, of course, he settled out of court. He didn't win. But for, I believe it was Sterling Lord, his publishers, Joe McGinnis's insurance company through his book publishers, to pay out $350,000, I think it was 1985, to a federal prisoner, that's winning. And he had no choice. He took the money because he needed to advance his opportunity to be released on his actual innocence. And I think the judge was very telling in that court proceeding, in that the Kassabs, the in-laws, then sued Jeff for the money that he got, but the judge gave the bulk of it to Jeff's mother, which is very unusual, so that no one could take it away.
Oh, that's interesting. So Jeff, he did ultimately get control of the money because he went to his mother. But there was some kind of ruling that he couldn't get the money because he was a prisoner? Son of Sam law wasn't in effect at that time, was it?
I don't know if forgive me. Yeah. I don't know if Son of Sam law was in effect at the time, but it may have been. But I know the Kassabs tried to get the entire settlement themselves, and but the Judge Ray was his name, Reye, and he took the bulk of it, and I think probably almost, forgive me on these figures, but I think it was like $280,000 of the $350,000, and gave it to Jeff's mother, who wasn't even involved, and then gave the Kassabs a portion of it. But of course, then his mother was able to use that money to help defend him.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Now, so let's go back now to you're 14 years old. You're a little singer-dancer. You meet Dr. Jeff MacDonald. Of course, you have a little crush on him, okay? Let's admit it.
Oh, no.
Not even a little bit?
No, I didn't. I wouldn't even remember that this happened except for what happened later. You know what I'm saying? When we get to that point, I'll tell you how then it remember. Oh, yeah, I remember him. It wasn't like that at all, no.
Okay, well, then let's get to the romance part. Okay, let's delve into the romance for a little bit. When did the relationship with Jeff? Let's take care of that right now, and we'll get into all the facts. I want to talk about everything with Ted Gunderson, with Greg Mitchell, Helena Stokely. I want to get into all of that. But let's do the romance. How'd you hook up with Jeff finally?
Well, all these years passed. Okay, my father, as I said, met him and spoke with him. So he, when the case went to court and all this, my father would, and another friends of my parents, there was a columnist in the Washington Post here on the East Coast, Jack Anderson.
Sure.
And he was a passionate advocate of Jeff's. And when my father recognized it was the same person, he would keep up on it, because Jack Anderson was always saying, this man shouldn't be in prison. I mean, back in 1980. And, of course, he was freed for 2 years, as you might recall. But anyway, so all during those years, it was just sort of like my father was not a personal friend, nothing like that. And I just remember his name coming up now and then. And then in the mid-'90s, my father died. And within a year, the following year, my mother died. Both very young. It was horrible. One of the worst things ever. I love them so much. And when you have a loved one, and you're desperate to help them, you will think of all kinds of out-of-the-box things to try to help them. And I always remembered, not only from friends talking about Jeff and the MacDonald case and saying, I can't believe this is going on. Like at a dinner party of my parents or something, or my dad would cut out an article or something, that he was a wonderful diagnostician. So when my mother was dying, she had she had cancer that could not be identified, and I was desperate to save her. So I wrote Jeff a note, not knowing if he would remember our family or me or my dad or my mom or anybody. I had no idea he was going through an appeal at the time, and I just asked him for help. And he, in the middle of an appeal in the mid-'90s there, he not only responded but asked to see my mother's she was still living at that moment, if he could see her medical records, scoured her medical records, wrote me, like a 50-page handwritten letter with a pencil that's 1.5 inches long, telling me everything that he saw in her medical records. And it touched me deeply that I didn't know, and then I found out later that he was, he was in an appeal at the moment. His life was on the line, his freedom, and yet he took time to try to help me and my family, because he's a born healer. And after my mother, back the day my mother, he was the one who told me that the doctors he was sorry to tell me that the doctors were right, that she didn't have any chance, none. But he told me how valiant she was and how she had lived so much longer and stronger than anyone else with her situation would have, to the fact where they sewed my mother up in the operating room to remove this giant tumor. She's 5'2" and weighed 100 pounds, and that they sewed they left a surgical instrument in her abdomen because they didn't think she'd ever leave the hospital.
Oh my God! I think you told me that last time too. Yeah.
Oh, he told me these things, I wouldn't know that. I don't know how to read medical records and that, and I didn't want to know really at that moment. But the point is that the day that she died, he happened to just phone me, and all I said was hello, and he said, "She's gone, isn't she?" He knew. He is a born healer and was born to save people, and it's such an ironic thing that the people he loved most he could not save, but he saved me in that instance. I was grief-stricken, and I still am, basically, but it's kind of built from there, talking on the phone, writing a letter here and there. Years went by, maybe 7 years, 5, and, eventually we met. I went out to meet him, and kind of went from there, and then, we married in 2002.
And how often do you get to see him?
Well, I try to see him as much as I can. There's been a lot of mitigating circumstances due to health issues at my end, and also, you go through everything you have, everything you have. So, like, even having reliable transportation is a problem. But I try to go every weekend if I can, and if I can't, I would say the least I go is twice a month. But I used to go every weekend, every day that I could, and I always did. And even if, no matter what, because he is the same person and so deserving, and I can't think of anyone in the world that I could ever sit next to in a room full of people and talk to for 6 hours at a shot for years on end and never be bored. He's interested in everything in life. His joy for life is just so, he's earned my love and respect. I knew I've researched this case. I know every detail of it, like an elephant, with the memory of an elephant. But, I fell in love with him because he's brave. He's a warrior. He's innocent, and he will never waver from that. And we talked about it, because he's been eligible for parole since 1990. And he would never go. For 15 years, he did not go. And that's another story about when the year he did decide to go and what transpired from that while maintaining his factual innocence. And he said to me, I will never leave here. If I leave here, I'm leaving here because I'm innocent. I never hurt my family. I love my family, and I would never disrespect them or my family by admitting to something I did not do, even if it means I die here. And I said, I get it. And we're going to get you out of here the right way, because you have the truth on your side. The truth, like love, and that sounds kind of, I don't mean to sound esoteric in any way, but it has a power of its own, and it has proven to be true. It's taken a long time, but it's true.
Okay, then let me ask you, like you've been married for 15 years, and you've been together longer than that, you've known him longer than that. Has there ever been a time when you've questioned his story?
Never for one, not even a scintilla of a second. And I don't, whatever other people do in their lives, as long as it's not hurting somebody, I say go for it. I know there are many people who are married, they marry someone who's in prison, and they know the person's guilty, and they either think there were reasons why, or they forgive them, whatever their reasons are. I just know for myself, and it doesn't make me better or worse than anybody, I would not be in this situation. I would not have ever gone in this direction for a nanosecond if I ever even had like a glance at him where I thought, oh, that's not, something's wrong. You know what I'm saying? You can't know someone this long and have friends who've known him 40 years and are still there for him, and been in prison 38 years, and he's never had a disciplinary action for any violence or anything. There's just it's not there. He's he's wrongly convicted, and
let me ask you a question. Of the evidence that has been presented against him, that people repeat over and over again, is there any of that evidence that you find concerning, or that you don't have an explanation for?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because that's why we are where we are in this unprecedented situation at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, where no other person in the federal system has ever reached this pinnacle. And that is because, we have a very flawed system. I don't know what your listener's opinion is on that, or yours, but that's how I know it. I'm living it. And so you have a situation where, any good defense lawyer will tell you, you're accused, you lose. They center in on somebody, and it doesn't matter what is in front of them. They are going to do what they're going to do, because it's a screwed up system where you have you're accused of a crime, and the people who hold the evidence since day one are rewarded for winning and putting you in prison. That's not fair. The burden of proof is supposed to be on them. You're supposed to have the presumption of innocence. They're supposed to swim upstream to prove that you're guilty, but that's not what happens in real life, and this is living proof of it. So what's happened over these many years, the evidence has not changed. Jeff has never wavered from his original account of what happened. It has been the media spin and so forth, and the government spewing out this thing about there's what I call myths of the case, this mountain of evidence they have of his guilt. Well, the trial judge, who had issues as well, was not fair, was very biased, and his own law clerk testified to that fact in 2012, Jerry Leonard. They had like 6 things 6 pieces of physical evidence. This is a circumstantial evidence case. So you're not going to have like a magic bullet there. You have to put the pieces together. And there's 6 pieces of evidence have all, over these years, and I'm happy to review them if that's what you'd like to do. But the point is, each one has been dismantled, shown to either have been misleading, junk science, or just a bold-faced lie. They suppressed evidence that anything that would corroborate Jeff's story, and the jury was misled terribly. And then now it's reached the point where in 2015, the Attorney General of the United States found that 3 of the key experts that the government employed through the FBI and so forth in Jeff's case, not another case, this one, that they presented junk science, they overstated what was in the realm of science. They presented false evidence to the jury. I mean, you have no one else to blame for this horrible thing that happened, even though they had 2 people who confessed and so forth. I'm just saying the physical evidence does not hold up, and the people who did that evidence have all been disgraced, kicked out. You don't realize there were 6 prosecutors. 4 have been disbarred or disgraced. 1 is dead, and 1 has recently dropped out of the picture after 38 years.
You know, that's a good point you make, though. Like, here you have a case where, worst case scenario, a guy loses his mind, he goes crazy, starts stabbing up his family, and comes up in his head with a story that night of who came in and did this. He comes up with an alibi story that some other guys did this, and he describes them. And somehow, some way, the people who fit those descriptions turn up later on and confess. Now, that's a pretty good defense, in my opinion. If I'm working on a defense, I think I hit a home run with that. So, but you mentioned that there are 6 major pieces of evidence that the prosecution used, and that you can debunk them. So why don't you give us those 6? What was that?
All right. I'm just, and anyone who's interested, on our website, we have a document section, and if you go back to, I think, 2005, there's a really fascinating document written by Tim Junkin, who was our attorney at the time. It's an itemized evaluation of the material evidence, and he goes through the 6 things that the trial judge said, were inculpatory, meaning bad for Jeff, right? And he shows how each one is not true, and that was a long time ago. Now, if they've even gone further, like I said, show the people who did those experiments have been, shown to be liars. But the number 1 was this pajama top. And if I never hear that word again in my life, I'll be happy. But I am certain the government knows where in the Sears catalog that set of blue pajamas came from and the serial number. But what they did, Jeff said he took the top off over his head, and there are numerous affidavits from the Army people, even that his pajama bottoms, when he was found and taken to the hospital, they thought he was dead. They had to resuscitate him 3 times. That the pajama bottoms were ripped from crotch to knee with fibers everywhere. And yet the way that these investigators centered in on it was that all the fibers that were blue from pajamas were from the top, not the bottom. He didn't walk through the house resuscitating his family, when they had blood all around his mouth when the MPs came in. He didn't have the top on. He had the bottoms on. So where are those threads? Why are they all from the top? And then to say that, and their theory was, what they said to the jury was that, and he said that he laid the top on his wife in a vain effort to ward off shock, even though he knew she was dead. I mean, it was a horrible situation, and he's a doctor. He was trying to cover her, and
let me
they
clarify.
came up with this idea that he had stabbed her through the top. Well, it was shown that the top was never matched to the holes in forgive me, this is delicate to say, and I say it with the deepest respect because this is Jeff's family and poor Colette. I mean, just imagine. But they never matched up these. The scientist, he was a chemist actually, Paul Stombaugh, who also had a book deal, Ed, by the way, that fell through, to write about the MacDonald case. He he never matched up whether the 48 holes in Jeff's pajama top matched the holes in Colette's top, her pajama top, nor the holes in her actual chest. He just was told to find a way to make these holes match up, and that's what he told the court. He said, it could have happened. I'm not saying it did happen this way. I'm saying it could have. It might have. I was just told to find a way to make it fit, and that's what I did. The directionality of the fibers, the fact that, a body is not stationary, all the laws of physics were out the window. That is junk science, and yet that's what the jury was told and led to believe was a fact, and it's ridiculous. That's number one.
Well, let me interrupt you for 1 second, because I really apologize, because I forgot to promote the website, which is themacdonaldcase.org, and MacDonald's is spelled MacDonald, so themacdonaldcase.org, no dashes or periods or anything in that, themacdonaldcase.org.
That's right, and I always say, like, the old farmer, not the restaurant.
Yeah,
I thought MacDonald was an easy name until, it isn't. And I would like to, if you don't mind, just add that since we last spoke several years ago, we still have updates to do on the website because, everything's volunteer, but we are really trying to do grassroots support, not just for Jeff's case, but for all of the wrongly convicted, because when he's exonerated, it's going to change the whole picture for all of the wrongly convicted. And like Bernie Sanders or someone like that who just takes, a donation of $5, you can add those up if people just contribute the smallest bit, if not just for Jeff, then for this whole idea that people don't even want to look at, that people are wrongly convicted. We now have, you can use, just push a button and make a donation, and is tax exempt. I'm sorry, tax deductible. We are a 501c3.
Yeah, so right at the top of the website here at themacdonaldcase.org, there's a donate button. You can go there and donate right now as you're listening, and also look over these documents as she's discussing them. Okay, so that's the first one, the pajama top. Okay, so out of the 6, what's the next one?
The next one is, oh gosh, I'm sorry. They're in a certain order.
Okay.
But there was it's so hard to talk about these things, even though I was not there. I hope you understand that. And if I sound clinical, I'm trying to be that way, okay?
I got you.
Because
you're doing fine.
then I can talk about it with you and hopefully inform people who think they know this case, or they think they know who my husband is. They think they don't. There was a, quote, murder club that the government centered in on, which was a slat of wood, and they identified it as coming from a bunch of wood that Jeff had used to build a bookshelf and or slats in the older daughter Kimberly's bed. Now, okay, so they determined that was the weapon that was used to kill Colette. Well, Jeff's fingerprints weren't on it. There was nothing, there's nothing. The fact that it came from the house is stupid, because people who confessed said that they came there to rough him up, and because he was being hard on drug users, and then things got out of hand because they were high on hallucinogenic drugs. So they didn't come there with a bunch of weapons. The one guy did have the baseball bat, and we have affidavits from people showing that people knew him to have a baseball bat. However, the fact that these weapons came, they made this very strong case about the weapons coming from the house, and logically that really doesn't prove anything, does it?
Okay, what about... no, you're right, and I was going to say that, because Stokely did say that they went there just to rough him up and they didn't bring weapons. So that kind of confirms what the confession says. What about, though, there's a claim that there was a surgical glove, a bloody surgical glove found in the house, and it matched the gloves that were underneath the kitchen cabinet?
Well, it's the fact is, of course, we don't know these things. You realize that this took years of Freedom of of information requests that were highly redacted to the point where you couldn't even read most of them to try to find a little nugget of something that's going to help you overturn your case. It's a horrible system, and the government's against you, right? They don't want you to have this information. So it turns out that no, the surgical gloves did not match. The little rubber tip that they found did not match they could not match them to the ones under the sink. I mean, you could say they were similar. They had no proof. They couldn't say that they were the same batch. They couldn't say anything about them. Nothing was conclusive. If anyone would take time to just even peruse the trial transcript from this awful case, there wasn't one government expert who opined that his or her opinion was a fact. They just said it could happen that way.
Let me ask
and
you
with
that.
the gloves, they said they were similar. That's all. That's just not.
Okay, now
what's that proof of?
I was watching today one of the tapes from Ted Gunderson, and he said that they found bloody syringes in the house. Is that true or false?
That is true, but the government suppressed that from the defense.
Now, what about Ted Gunderson also said too that they found wax in the children's beds, and they found some wax in the house, and Stokely said that she had wax candles in her pocket, and they were walking around with candles and stuff. Is that true that they did find wax in the house?
They found this again, suppressed evidence, Brady violations. Should I say what a Brady violation is?
Well, if you want, go ahead.
Well, okay. Just Brady violation is that in this screwy system that we have that is not justice, as far as I'm concerned. The government holds all the evidence against you, and they are, you're supposed to trust that they will give you anything that helps your case. And they're in charge of that evidence since day one. So it's against their interest because they're not going to win if they tell you, well, we found 3 different kinds of candle wax that don't match any candles in your house, and you said you saw a woman with a flickering light in your house. So they hid it. They hid it. We didn't know that until the late 80s, that they found 3 different types of candle wax in the house on the bedspread of Kimberly, the older daughter, on the coffee table, and I beg your pardon, I don't recall exactly where the third one was, but they didn't match any candle in the house, and the MacDonalds had a lot of candles, and but they hid it. So we didn't know that. So the jury never heard that. They didn't hear that there was wax that didn't match anything.
What about this business with the ice pick? The MacDonald said that there was no ice pick in the house, but then later on a babysitter testified, oh, yeah, there was an ice pick. And an ice pick was used in the murders.
Well, that's interesting because Pamela Kalin, who was a regular babysitter, she lived next door, she initially said there was no ice pick. And then through the Army CID hearing, see these witnesses, the government, I mean, that's a lot of pressure for people to take, and they cave, they dilute, they, don't remember so well anymore. If it's, the government's pressuring them, the FBI is showing up at their house and so forth. So her story morphed over time. Oh, yes, she did remember an ice pick. However, interestingly to me, which is a little-known fact, a nurse and a medic who were married, still our friends, Rick and Judy Sosin, who knew Jeff and his family since 1969, visited them all the time. She testified in a sworn affidavit that, at Christmas time, they were there with Jeff and Colette and the girls, and Colette was showing off Jeff's gift of a state-of-the-art ice crushing machine. So she didn't need an ice pick. It was, but you know what I'm saying? It's crazy. But even if there was an ice pick, if it came from that house or it did not, it didn't prove who used it.
Okay.
What other case do you have where none of their murder weapons have the defendant's fingerprints on them?
Well, there were the gloves, though. The gloves were there. But now, let me ask you a question, because we're about to come to a break. So real quick, before he was convicted, the Army held, how did this work? The Army held hearings first, and then, we got the break coming up. We're here with Kathryn MacDonald. The website is themacdonaldcase.org. We'll be right back with more of Kathryn MacDonald. We're discussing the Jeffrey MacDonald murder case from the 70s. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. Our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we can trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles, and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the OppermanReport.com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. You can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations live Friday night and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod This and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air, you get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by a
apart from the free education, information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative, mainstream and alternative media shells and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today. No rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.
It's It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here with Kathryn MacDonald. She's the wife of Dr. Jeff MacDonald, who's in prison right now. And then we're talking about the Fort Bragg murders of 1970, something around that time, a long time ago. But hopefully he's going to get a new ruling coming up shortly. We'll be talking about that. So, Kathryn, you there? Kathryn? Let me see.
She dropped off. I'll try to get her back.
Okay. So we're waiting for Kathryn to come back. Thanks, Danny. Let's see. Coming up next week on Saturday, I'm going to have the lawyer from New York who started Scores nightclub, the strip club in Scores. So that's coming up next week. And the next hour here with Kathryn, we're going to got a whole bunch of stuff we're going to be getting into. All about Ted Gunderson, this was the first case Ted Gunderson took when he left the FBI. And this is the first case that got Ted Gunderson on the kick of investigating Satanism and satanic cults and stuff like that. Because Ted is convinced. You back, Kathryn?
Yeah, hi.
Hey, how you been? Okay, so we are back.
We had a little. We're having a storm here in Columbia, so
quite a bit of glitches there for me the past couple of shows. Now, real quick though, originally I don't know how this works exactly, but because he was in the Army, he was a captain in the Army, and this happened on Fort Bragg base. This, by the way, this happened during that period of time when all that drug smuggling was going on at Fort Bragg. All the drugs were coming in through the coffins from Vietnam. They're bringing in the heroin, and it was being circulated by the country boys up to Harlem from that movie with Denzel Washington. This is where all this was going on at this time. Now,
body bags. Well, I mean, I have no personal knowledge of that, but
yeah,
but it's pretty well known that especially Army bases were, loaded with drug use during Vietnam. It's ridiculous.
20 years ago, that was it was like a suspicion, but now we know this happened. And they've come out and admitted it. The guy Wallace, the country boys, they admitted this happened. Okay, but now how does this work? Because he was on an Army base. He was in the Army. The Army first investigated this and had some kind of a hearing or something, and he was cleared, or they dropped the charges, and then the civilian court picked it up. Explain how that happened.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to do that. If this had not happened on a military base, it would have been a state case if there was any case at all. But because it was a military base, even though the post was open and so forth, and even though the person who's closest to you is always going to be a suspect, no matter what the situation is. Of course, they had to investigate Jeff, and to his credit, people forget he's 73 years old. He was 26 when this happened. He was a doctor. He is thrown into this nightmare, and but the Army wanted to investigate him, and he went in without a lawyer. He said, I have nothing to hide. I'll tell you anything you want to know. And he did. He was interviewed on April 6, 1970 for the first time, and his story has never wavered from what he said then. And by the way, Ed, if I could just digress for 1 second.
Sure.
One of these major myths of this case is, I hear it over and over, that Jeff was resuscitated and said drug-crazed hippies killed my family. Okay. He didn't say that. They resuscitated him 3 times and then said, who did this to you? And he described them. These people existed, and one of the MPs, who was only 21 years old, Kenneth Micah, saw a woman matching Jeff's description on the street corner on the way there, and the only reason he didn't stop was because they were on the way to an emergency. They didn't know what to expect, and he called his commanding officer, Lieutenant Polk, and said, I just saw someone on the street who MacDonald saying this is who was in his house, and they didn't pursue it.
And so, we know that today that was Helena Stokely, who also claims that was her there on the street.
That's that's correct, but it doesn't seem to. And I don't know of any other cases where you have people confess not once but multiple times, and they're not believed. I mean, some people do give false confessions, and there are people fighting to get out of prison because they were coerced into confessions. But in this case, you have people who went to their graves over this.
One more thing. Helena Stokely was a confidential informant, not for the military police, and for many local police departments too. And one of these police detectives said that she was an informant in over 500 cases. So she was making cases in court where people were getting convicted. She was a reliable witness in all of those cases. I don't know if she was a witness, but she was giving information to the police.
She was turning them in. She was according to Prince Beasley, from the Fayetteville Police Department, the most reliable informant he ever had. But the jury never heard that because Judge Dupree would not allow any of the corroborating witnesses about Helena's confessions to them to testify, even to law enforcement officers.
Right. Helena Stokely is the one who was in the floppy hat. She's the one that allegedly was saying acid is groovy, and you know, which is a weird thing to say, but she says she said it. Now,
it's not weird.
You don't
Why
think?
Do you think that, I mean, that was the link. I mean, acid is groovy. I mean, that's like 60s hippie talk. I mean, that was. See, they try to frame that up like it doesn't make sense, like it's outlandish. But come on, that was the era. I was just a child, but I mean, I've watched documentaries about the 60s, and that's not acid and LSD and groovy and pigs. I mean, that was.
Well, pig, yeah. Pig. People still say pig today. One thing, though, about Helena Stokely, too, because you can watch her videotaped statement taken by Ted Gunderson, and it's available on YouTube. I was watching it today. It's 35 minutes long. It's very interesting. She comes off very credible to me. Okay, even though, I tell you, I was really surprised to see that I wasn't very impressed with Gunderson's line of questioning, the way he handled the questioning. He didn't seem very well prepared. But in her statement, her videotape statement, she says that around this period of time, she had $25,000 worth of mescaline, which is an illegal hallucinogenic drug. So, and that's back in 1970. That would be like $75,000, $85,000 today. I mean, probably even more. So, this woman was not some kind of small-time drug dealer. These characters here who were in this house had access to money and resources. No?
I can't speak to that personally, my personal knowledge of that, but it certainly is correct that they used drugs and they sold drugs, and Helena was considered a very reliable informant, and it was never disclosed also that William Ivory, who was the lead investigator in Jeff's case, had a relationship with her, knew her prior to the murders, and it was like, yes, I was, and her father was a lieutenant colonel, and I have a whole little thing I'd like to say about Helena at some point, but
go ahead,
it's
do it now.
Probably relevant to your point
no,
right
go ahead.
now.
Do it now. Go ahead. What do you got?
What I want to say about Helena Stokely is, of course, I never knew her, and but she's become some mythical character as well. It's like Jeff. He's not looked at as a person. It's a case. It's a thing, and that's not what this is about. She was an 18-year-old girl who's very talented. I know her family. I know her brother. I interviewed her mother. I spoke with her mother. I know his Mr. Stokely, her brother's wife, very well. They're wonderful people, upstanding people. Helena just was one of those. It happens all the time. An 18-year-old who falls in with the wrong crowd. She was there at the wrong time. She didn't, and I'm not trying to excuse anything other than to say she got messed up in the drug scene, which was very prevalent at the time, and she was there at the wrong time. She didn't hurt anybody. She was there, and that was key, and yet she got no relief. I mean, the government had every opportunity to offer her immunity. She offered to tell them who her co-murderers were if they'd give her immunity, and they wouldn't. So, I mean, what was she to do?
And also, too, she says in the Gunderson tape as well, too, that she got into this cult because she wanted to learn about white witchcraft in order to do good, benevolent witchcraft for people, which I don't believe exists. I think it's all evil. But her motivation at the time was to get into beneficial type witchcraft and wound up with this other stuff. Although the neighbors did say some stuff, she went into the Manson family and stuff like that. But now, what motivation? Can you think of any reason why Helena Stokely would lie about her involvement in this?
That is, I didn't mean to, I'm not laughing, I'm just so ironic. No one, two of the four people that Jeff described exist, the other two existed, but the Army did not ever pursue them, the black male and the other male who he said was of mixed race. But Helena Stokely and her boyfriend at the time confessed to everyone they knew. I mean, numerous times. They both died apart from. They'd been apart forever. They this is when they were 18, but they both died at 32 in separate circumstances because they couldn't live with the guilt of what they had done. And I think one of the witnesses who's come forward in recent years that's very, very important, a gentleman named Bryant Lane, who knew Greg Mitchell personally. I got a paralegal degree so I could try to help more, and I interviewed Mr. Lane, and I trying to be always right on target and not let any personal feelings get in the way. He said that Greg Mitchell confessed to him on his deathbed that he killed the MacDonald family, as well as his priest and his everybody knew him, okay, anyway, I said to Mr. Lane, it's so simple, Ed. I said, well, what makes you think he was telling you the truth? I was just trying to be like a devil's advocate, because he was going to sign an affidavit about Greg Mitchell's confession. It was very important. And he said, well, I've heard, and this is in his affidavit, he said, I've heard of people going to their grave with a terrible secret, but I never heard of someone confessing to something horrible that they never did.
I would agree, absolutely.
Excuse me, that's not a good expression. You know what I'm saying? It's like, It's common sense. You have to, and this whole idea about credibility and reliability. I mean, how is it that Helena was reliable as long as she did not implicate herself? And if you read her trial testimony, she never said, she admitted she burned her clothing and her wig and her hat and her boots because they would connect her to the murder. She said that on the witness stand. However, the rest of the time she said, I don't know. She never said no. But Judge Dupree decided no meant she was, I don't know meant she was not there, and she was not a credible witness because she was a drug user, even though anyone thinking straight knows that the type of overkill that happened is what drug users do. So, but she was reliable for when she was turning other people in. But when she said, I don't know, he took that, he said, oh, well, she said, I don't know, so she wasn't there. She's not reliable. And I've been thinking to myself, I wonder if I can explain this to make not sound, it makes sense, is that if she was not reliable on the witness stand when she said, I don't remember, and the judge took that to mean, no, I was not there, but she's not credible, then wouldn't it mean, yes, I was there?
Oh, that's interesting. But now, also, too, you said she burned her wig. Now, wasn't a long hair found there at the crime scene?
Well, that's another piece of suppressed evidence. We were back to the six things that, at the trial, the jury did not know that the government had found 22-inch long synthetic blonde fibers. I mean, that's really long. I saw a wig recently in online, and I was like, that's like it'd be like to my bicep. That's a long hair. And these hairs were found in a hairbrush on the sideboard in the kitchen where Helena Stokely said she answered the phone, and this man who was, there were two Dr. MacDonalds on post that night who lived there. Can you believe this coincidence? And the operator hooked this man, Jimmy Fryer, up with Jeff's house, and Helena answered the phone, and he heard a woman cackling and men in the background and saying, and he heard a man say, hang up the goddamn phone. And that's exactly what she said, and that's what he said she said. But his testimony wasn't allowed to be heard by the jury because during the weekend that Helena was testifying, he was in the county jail for having passed a bad check. So therefore, he was not reliable. Somehow he conjured up that idea. And that hairbrush had these 22-inch long synthetic hairs in them. And what's transpired since then, they were hidden from us. We didn't know, the defense did not know about this until the 1990s when it was disclosed through the Freedom of Information Act. And you have to act on these things within 1 year or you lose it forever. You know, you can't let it the evidence accumulate so you have enough, right? It's like a very wicked game they play. If you find something that they kept away from you, and you find it, you have to report it in a year or it's gone. So each time they say, well, that alone is not enough, that alone is not enough. And what happened with this Michael Malone, who was the go-to guy for Brian Murtaugh and other prosecutors, he was an FBI hair and fiber expert. And he's been discredited, ironically hired as a consultant to the FBI after he lied. They found, the Attorney General found that he lied in over 86 cases, some resulting in people's deaths, wrongful convictions, most of them. He lied in these cases. He was the guy you could go to who would say what you wanted to say, and he nailed that whole issue with the wig hairs by testifying under oath as a FBI expert that those 22-inch long synthetic fibers could not have come from a wig. They must have come from a doll that no one's ever seen. And, you know, he interviewed a woman from Mattel who was a doll expert, and she told him there was no doll that had 22-inch long hair, and she refused to sign an affidavit. He had textile books in the FBI library that told him the opposite was true, that's exactly where they came from. But they didn't like that because it didn't fit with their scenario, so they suppressed it. The jury never heard of it. And then Michael Malone and Jeff's appeal in the 1990s, he lied under oath and said they weren't from a wig, and they were.
Okay. Now, moving on from the wig, I got a question for you. Have you ever talked to an author, investigator named Maury Terry?
Maury Terry?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, he wrote the book The Ultimate Evil, about the Process Church and the Final Judgment. In Ted Gunderson's video that I was watching today, he mentioned that there was someone involved in this cult named Wizard who was a member of the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with Helena's interviews where she said that one of her her friends went by the name of Wizard.
Okay. Now, when we had our last interview, right after I was looking into this, and I saw the name that there was a Process Church connection to this, and so I contacted Maury Terry, who was the author of this book about the Son of Sam cult and the Process Church, and he was I would say he was the renowned expert. He's passed away since then. That he was the renowned expert on this the Process Church and all the members and stuff like that. He's done more research on it than anybody alive, I would believe. He's helped reopen the case. So I asked him, I said, is there any connection to a Process Church member with the Jeff MacDonald case? And right away he shot back at me that he had no faith in Ted Gunderson's investigation and that he had investigated this. He had looked into this on his own. But now you say you never talked to him, and you don't think the defense has ever talked to him either? You never heard the name, right?
I have not heard it, but that doesn't...
Right.
I can't say if... I have never heard of him, no.
Anyway,
but as far as Ted Gunderson goes, you do know he was the head of the FBI in L.A., and as soon as he came out, quote, as a whistleblower, saying Helena Stokely was involved in this, he like all whistleblowers, he got thrown under the bus by the government.
Yeah, I knew Ted Gunderson. Okay, so we'll get into that too. We're going to get into Ted Gunderson. But and it's very interesting that whenever I bring up this case anywhere, right away people want to bring up Ted Gunderson. But now back to the Maury Terry thing with the Process Church and Wizard. When I brought this up about was there any connection to a Process Church member with this cult there at Fort Bragg, Maury Terry tells me, well, I looked into this case, and what really happened is that Jeff MacDonald was they found amphetamines in his medicine cabinet. He was taking these amphetamines, and he went into a rage and violently attacked his whole family. What do you know about Jeff MacDonald's use of amphetamines back in the 70s, when pretty much everybody was using them?
Well, I know that the government, and I have the documents dating back through the Freedom of Information Act, when you got lucky enough to get something out of tens of thousands of pages, back to J. Edgar Hoover and Warren Coolidge, these folks from way back in the day, saying there's no motive here. There's no this man has no. He's squeaky clean. There's the word is used, and they had meetings about how there was nothing there, and he had been absolved by the Army. I know we got off track on that subject. I'd like to go back to it at some point, but he the night of the murders, they did a blood test and a urine test on Jeff, and he didn't have any drugs in his system. He had a teeny winny. He had said he had a liqueur with his wife, Colette, at 11 o'clock. So there was a teeny trace of alcohol, but that was it. He didn't have any drugs in his system. That is all a made-up, fabricated, vicious lie by Joe McGinnis that somehow caught onto the public. That's just his theory. And I sat in the courtroom and listened to him spew off on these things. Jeff did not. He was not an amphetamine user. A lot of people did use amphetamines, but if he took a drug, a diet pill or whatever, escatrol theory, that's all Joe McGinnis. That's just, he's not a, in fact, I've researched a lot of stuff on this because, escatrol was taken off the market, not because it made people go crazy, but because it was found to be ineffective. And I know this from the Food and Drug Administration. I have all the documents on it, and they actually still, escatrol was two drugs. It's like a drug with a buffer, and it's actually still on the market under another name, and it's now used for children with ADD. And you can give a child 80 times the 15 milligram Spanuel that Joe McGinnis touts, that Jeff supposedly took or whatever, 80 times that dose, and it's not an overdose for a 12-year-old. That's ridiculous. I mean, he's not a drug user. They never had, they could not find reason why he would. He never had a psychotic break, and that's just something that Joe McGinnis made up, and it's despicable.
But the thing is, they did find this amphetamines in his medicine cabinet.
I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
What I know is that Joe McGinnis was given full access to Jeff's condo where he lived out in Long Beach. He gave him full access. He could go and look at anything he wanted, and he found some memo or something where Jeff said about that he had maybe taken an amphetamine for his weight loss program days before the murders or something like that, and he started grasping onto that straw to try to come up with a theory of his own to explain what no one could explain, that Jeff did not do this. So he
but wait, hold on. I'm still not clear. Did they find amphetamines in his medicine cabinet or not?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I know he had an arsenal of drugs because he's a doctor.
All right.
That particularly I don't know, and I don't recall. I don't personally have any knowledge of escatrol being in his house, but I could. That is I'm just so specific. I don't want to misspeak.
No, I know you don't. Relax. Okay, so they found there were no amphetamines in his house, but you're saying that
in his body.
In his body. And they gave him a test that was not in his body. And we know today that there's people who, they're shooting methamphetamine, they're smoking methamphetamine 7, 8, 10 days in a row, okay? And still they're not killing their entire families. Now,
no.
Right. But where does this come from with the methamphetamines that this guy McGinnis says he found some I'm just not following. Where's that coming from?
Well, apparently when Jeff was first incarcerated in 79 for 6 months, Joe McGinnis went out, and my understanding is Jeff gave him full access to his condominium, and Jeff was being carted all over the country and sent to prisons.
Gotcha.
And he opened he had nothing to hide. When you're telling the truth, you're transparent. And it's not just that he trusted Joe McGinnis. It was like there wasn't anything for Joe McGinnis to find that, you think Jeff's a brilliant man. I mean, you either have to believe he's very smart or he's really stupid, because why would he let a book author in his house if there was evidence in his house that would be derogatory toward him? But there wasn't anything, and he just took this, notes Jeff was keeping about his weight loss program, if I'm remembering correctly, and he said, I took a 15 milligram spaniel of esketrol on this day or whatever. He kept a little log, and he said, I may have taken one this day, but not that day. I mean, it was like nothing definitive, and it was vague, and obviously, as I said, the first thing they did was test his blood and urine and Colette's for drugs and alcohol, and as I told you, what the results were. So he needed to come up with a theory, something for his book editors. I mean, if you really look at Fatal Vision, I remember reading it when I was 21, Ed, and I remember finishing the book and thinking, oh, okay, well, that was really, it kept you on your edge of your seat, right? And I thought, well, just the fact that the military policeman saw a woman on the street corner who met his description upon resuscitation, that's beyond, right there, that's it. And then the second thing is McGinnis's, I think he thought he was, obviously he had a big bestseller there, but the voice of Jeffrey MacDonald and all this stuff, making him sound like, I don't know, not a real person at all. He made that whole thing up to try to attach a motive that the government never came up with. At the trial, they said, we don't have to prove he's the kind of person who would do it. We have to prove that he did do it. And in order to do that, they just manipulated and hid. They manipulated evidence. They hid evidence. They coerced. They threatened Helena Stokely, the prosecutor, who's been disbarred. Four of the six have been disbarred. They did anything they could to win at any cost, and that's what they did.
Okay, so, let me ask you this now. I heard something today, because I did a lot of research on this today. I was watching a lot of videos and stuff on it. Wasn't there a time when the government was alleging that this was premeditated?
Yes. Again, since it just provokes this feeling in me, because it's I want to reinforce this point to you, Ed, is that, again, Jeff has never changed anything about his story since 1970. Never. Not one detail of it did he ever go back and say, well, I remembered that wrong or whatever. The government has held that evidence since 1970, and their evidence that keeps changing. Okay? So, yes, they've initially... I'm so sorry. I've now gotten a little off track.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Let's back up here. Try and focus on my questions, okay? And because I know when I ask you a question, you're answering a lot of stuff that's been stored up in your head, like that other people have been accusing you with.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm trying. I really am. I'm just, when it's your life, it's really hard not to.
You're doing really good. But the question was that at one point the government was claiming that this was a premeditated case, a premeditated murder, which to me would be such an uphill stretch. Now, what did they base that on, that it was premeditated? That they found that magazine in the house with the Charles Manson thing? Was that it? The only thing?
Yes, it's quite interesting in that the premeditation thing changed. William Ivory, who was the lead investigator and who walked in and just decided it was a stage scene immediately, he started this, thing that it was a copycat Manson murder. The Manson murders had happened 6 months before then, and he has changed his story over the years. At first, it was that Jeff had been reading about the Manson murders and was fascinated with the Manson murders, and then decided to kill his family. Then it morphed into he killed his family and didn't know how to cover it up, so he goes back to the living room and finds this Esquire magazine with an article about Charles Manson and says, "Oh, I'll just go do that." I mean, that is the truth. That he actually, William Ivory says that in 2 different interviews about exactly what I just told you. And if I may say something further about the Esquire magazine this was February 17th, 1970. Jeff and Colette had a subscription to that magazine, and this was the March 1970 issue. So if you really look at it, it was really new in their household, right? And the truth of the matter is it was found in a stack of magazines. It wasn't on the top. It did not have Charles Manson on the cover. It had Charles Bronson on the cover. That's the name, Bronson?
Yeah.
Yes, and then there's a little thing at the bottom that says Home on the Range. And if you read that article, what it was about was when that Charles Manson lived, he and his girls, followers, took a bus and moved in with a farmer, and this isn't very nice, but he used these women that were his followers to so the farmer had access to these women so that they could all live there, and that's what the article was about. And Ivory said that that's where Jeff got this idea of acid is groovy, kill the pigs. But if you read that article, if you look at the magazine, that's not what it's about, and those words are never used in it. And further, the FBI's fingerprint analysis shows that Jeff's fingerprints weren't even on most of the pages of that article. They were on like a page that was an ad, and he's right-handed, and it was like a left thumbprint or something, but Colette's fingerprints were on that article. But the thing is, the article is not about murdering anybody. And Manson was not on it's just crazy. But he came up with that idea. In fact, there was a blood smudge on the cover. It turned out to be Ivory's, or one of the investigators. I shouldn't say definitively Ivory because I'm just talking off my memory.
Right.
But it turned out the blood smear was, that fingerprint was never identified to be Jeff's or anyone that they could identify except an MP or an investigator. So that's really a great reason to throw someone in jail for the rest of their life, right?
Now, and also, too, this is 1970s, so the kind of crime scene, chain of custody and preserving evidence isn't what we have today. For the youngsters out there watching, okay, listening to the show, the things back then were not done like they're done today, okay, even with gloves and stuff back in those days. So you're talking about a whole other world. We're down to about a half hour left, and I want to get into what the new. How much time do you think we'll need for what's going on right now in court right now with the new ruling about to come out?
I don't know. Depends on what you would like me to say. Ask me.
Okay. Well, then let's start with this. Let's go back to the thing about we were talking about the military court and then the civilian court, because there was a military hearing where he was cleared, correct?
Yes, and this is really important, I think, in that the article, Jeff, as I told you, he was interviewed in April of 1970, and then the Army called what they call an Article 32 hearing, which is a precursor to a court-martial. It's the civilian equivalent of a grand jury.
Okay.
And what's really ironic there is it was the longest, most detailed our Article 32 hearing in the history of the military, 7 weeks with 79 witnesses, and the presiding colonel and the other presiding head people from the Army wrote their report and said the charges against Captain MacDonald are not true, not insufficient evidence. I don't care who says that to you. I have a paper where, he said they're not true and that the alibis of Helena Stokely and her, cohorts should be investigated. That was Colonel Rock's evaluation. Okay? So the thing is, if they had found a scintilla of evidence, if Colonel Rock and the others on this, top brass at Fort Bragg, they brought in from Washington, D.C., these experts of every kind, 79 people, if they found any thought that he was involved in any way, they would have court-martialed him. And if they had court-martialed him and he'd been cleared, then the DOJ could have never tried him as a civilian. But because there was nothing there, the DOJ was able to prosecute him as a civilian because they said the Article 32 was like a grand jury, it wasn't a trial.
And he did get an honorable discharge as well. So then, again, I know we talked about this last time. And how did this wind up in the federal court? Because he was on an Army base?
Yes.
Has that been contested in the court? That how can he be acquitted in an Army hearing and then charged in the federal courts because it's an Army base? That would seem to be some avenue of litigation. No. Well,
it's considered a federal reservation, and they said that it was not a violation of his rights because the Article 32, as I said, was a precursor to the court-martial. If he'd been court-martialed and won, and Colonel Rocket said these charges aren't true, it would have been over. But they said that the Article 32 was not a trial, and therefore he was left open to be tried as a civilian.
Gotcha. And have you looked up the statistics of people charged in federal court, what the conviction rate is? It's something insane, like 90%, 98%, something like that. Have you ever looked it up?
No, but I knew a lot of statistics, but not that one. What was it again?
It's something insane. It's like 98% conviction rate. When in the federal court, when you're arrested in federal court and charged in federal court, your conviction rate is like 90%. It's like it's something ridiculous. I don't even know why they bother taking you to court.
I go back to what we were saying.
Yeah.
I was saying at the very beginning is that the system needs a total overhaul. It is set up for disaster. It's set up in favor of people being put in prison. The prosecutors are rewarded for winning. They're promoted. They get fame. They get book deals. I mean, I can't tell you. That was a very major theme in Jeff's evidentiary hearing in 2012, and still is. The many people who have made money off of this tragedy, where he lost his family. It's incredible, and they're trained to win. And I think I told you last time that we spoke about meeting disbarred prosecutor Jim Blackburn over dinner for 5 hours, where he told me that was my job was it didn't matter if he was innocent, it was to win.
It's funny. You just mentioned the last show we did. I spent all day long watching all this stuff, looking for any kind of thing I could listen to on this. Ted Gunderson, whatever I could find, the blind justice. What is that? A false witness? And everything. I didn't think to listen to my old interview. I didn't think to listen to myself talking to you. You'd think that would have been the first thing I would have played, but I didn't even think of that. My brain damage lately is really Now, the last time we talked, and I know Jeff is going to be listening to this show. We had talked about the involvement with Ted Gunderson in this case. I asked you, did he insert himself into the case? No, he had retired. And then a group of doctors had hired Gunderson to come in and investigate this case. And this is pretty much what exposed Ted Gunderson to the idea of satanic cults in this country doing evil things. Am I correct?
That's my understanding. Of course, Helena and her people who were associated with her, the jury was not allowed to hear. They admitted they were into satanic rituals,
right.
And that had to do with Colette's pregnancy and all that. It's it's strange, but that's what people who are into drugs have strange ideas. I don't, how can you make sense of something that makes no sense,
Well, I follow a lot of cases involving satanic cults, so this doesn't surprise me at all. Now, the thing is Ted seemed to think that this was also somehow connected to higher ups besides this cult and these low-level military people that were involved in this cult, that this case, these cult members that were dealing drugs, $25,000 worth of mescaline, were also somehow involved in the larger heroin smuggling case in the body bags. What does Jeff think about that after spending his whole life involved in this situation? Does he put any credence into that?
We have never really discussed that because, and I think it's sort of the idea of it's bad enough that our government conspired to railroad a person, but to get into whether it was this mass conspiracy, we haven't ever really talked about that at all. I mean, I think his belief and mine is, that just what Helena and Greg Mitchell said, that he was tough on drug users and they wanted to teach him a lesson and it got out of hand. That's simple as that. And, Colette was accosted at night school that night. People want to make this case so complicated, and it's really simple. There were intruders or there weren't.
Right. And
the evidence of the intruders is there, and our lawyer, our lead counsel, Joe Zatarsky, wrote a fantastic brief, which is again on our website prior to the oral arguments in January. He points out that the government relied on all this extraneous stuff because their case is weak. They had no case, and now they've been stripped down, and none of it's all junk. The exhibits are shown to be junk science, what they relied on, and then the people who presented that evidence have been found to be liars and cheats. And now, at the 11th hour, they're now saying that, after 9 years of waiting for DNA tests, that the 3 exhibits that were found to be exculpatory, helpful to Jeff's memory of what happened, are contaminated. That is where we are.
Okay.
They said that in front of the Fourth Circuit on January 26th. John Bruce, the U.S. Attorney, Assistant U.S. Attorney for North Carolina, said that, there was no chain of custody, and one of the judges asked, what does that say about all of your evidence? And that's Joe's point. Our lawyer's point was, you have to connect the dots at some point, and that's the Fourth Circuit's job is now. They're looking at totality of the evidence that that original jury did not hear. And if they had heard all of this that we know now that the government suppressed and lied about and so forth, would they make the same decision? Would any reasonable juror vote to convict Jeff? And, well, I think it's many, people, there's a whole generations coming up, Ed, who don't know anything about this case. They never heard of it, and they're appalled. And then there's those few, maybe older than 55 or so, who remember a book and think it's true. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know if it's harder for people to grasp the idea that our government does bad things, and they do it for reasons that because for promotions and for prestige and for book deals. They do all kinds of things, and we see it all the time. And yet, it's easier to believe that a man who never had any history of violence, has never done anything violent, in 38 years of wrongful incarceration, just went berserk for 5 minutes, never to be seen before ever again, and has never been proven to have happened. That is not justice. There should be a much higher standard in our country to lock people up for the rest of their lives. It shouldn't be this easy.
Yeah. Kathryn, wait. You don't have to tell. You don't have to tell me that. I got to tell you. I even think that even to detain people or to stop people or police drawing their weapons on people, that there should be a whole report and investigation done on every single incident like that. I believe we should have civilian reviews upon arrest before you get put in a cell. On arrest, before arraignment, before that, there should be a civilian review board right there to look over the case and see if the arrest, the detainment is justified. That's where my thinking comes from. Now, one thing
I'm with you. The North Carolina, of all places, interesting that the state of North Carolina has an innocence board, and the National Center on NCCA. I'm trying to think what the National Center on Wrongful Convictions, run by Christine Muma, who's one of our supporters and dear friends, and they have an independent body for state cases, not federal. State cases where an independent body of lawyers and forensic people and so forth come in and evaluate a case, not the prosecutors. They don't get to decide whether the person's actually innocent. And that's why they've had so much better luck with actually looking at people's innocence, because they don't have a vested interest. As long as we have a system that's got this vested interest, this is going to continue, and it's like a rock that needs to be lifted and cleaned out. And I want to say, may I add something, because I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to make sure that your listeners and yourself are aware of where this case is at this moment. Okay. And that is, I think Joe Zatarsky and Hart Miles, our attorneys, did a wonderful job of presenting. I mean, you're looking at a 47-year-old situation. And we're asking the Fourth Circuit, 3 judges, to look at the totality of the evidence. And if you the government spent all these years piecemealing it, right? And if you look at it all together, you can't come to any other conclusion that's reasonable in my. I mean, and it's not just because I'm personally involved. I mean, I'm being totally objective, and I can be objective when in these situations. It doesn't make any sense at all. But the burden of proof now is so high that no one ever in the federal system has ever reached the point where Jeff is now. And Joe's argument, which is brilliantly laid out and is accurate, he starts off his final brief to the Fourth Circuit saying, in order for the government's evidence, in order for the government to prevail, one must believe that everyone on the defense side is a liar. That's the opening statement of that brief. And then he goes about showing how these people who never knew each other, they're all interconnected. They all heard the same thing. They were told the same thing. It would be beyond, I don't know if you have someone who knows statistics to say, what is the chance of you being revived, and you describe the people, they exist, they confess numerous times, and all these different people corroborate that, including the latest things, have been the U.S. Marshal, Jim Britt, watching the prosecutor who's now been disbarred on 12 felony counts of dishonesty, embezzling from his law firm, but forging judges' signatures. And by the way, the signature that he forged and was let off the hook for, the one felony charge was Judge Dupree's signature. Forged his signature, and Judge Dupree declined to press charges.
And Dupree's involved in this case?
Jim Blackburn?
No, Dupree. You said Dupree.
Dupree was the original trial judge.
Oh, wow.
And now, with this hearing in 2012, okay, we've got 3 independent witnesses who were friends of Greg Mitchell's, who all came forward on their own. I can't think of any witness that I know of that we've ever sought out. People, as they get older or their consciences bother them, they come forward. And these 3 different men came forward over a period of 2 years and all gave us affidavits stating that Greg Mitchell confessed to them on different occasions, including his deathbed. And, a deathbed confession is considered, irrefutable.
Okay,
irrefutable.
Clarify again.
On his deathbed, he said this, and the government tried to keep these affidavits out. Then, Helena Stokely's mother tells us that Helena confessed to her own mother. Why would she say that? It's against interest. There was nothing wrong with that woman mentally. She was sharp as a tack, and our lawyers were there. And the government's trying to say that she wasn't mentally sound or something, or that since I'm Jeff's wife and also paralegal, I must have, I don't know what, done something to coerce her in some way, even though our lawyers were there and her own son was there. It's ridiculous. And then you've got, on top of that, at this hearing in 2012, Judge Dupree's law clerk was a lawyer named Jerry Leonard, and he'd called after Helena had testified on that Friday, and she had this amnesia about the 4 hours of the murders. She knew she was before and after, but not during. He calls up his law clerk and says, "I need you to." And this was his testimony. It's on our website. Jerry Leonard was. He's an attorney, right? So he has the attorney-client privilege, which lasts even after death. But he was, a lot went on at the hearing, and eventually he was allowed to break the privilege to tell what Helena said to him when he was her lawyer, when Judge Dupree called him in the middle of the night and said, "I need you to babysit a witness." Now, why would you do that if you don't want her to be quiet? And he calls Jerry Leonard, and Jerry Leonard got up on the stand and told, in front of an open courtroom, said that Judge Dupree, he had respect for Judge Dupree, but in this particular situation, he was appalled. His admiration for Judge Dupree was forever tainted by the fact that Judge Dupree hated Bernie Siegel, Jeff's Jewish attorney from the North, and therefore he hated Jeff. He said that under oath. He said it was clear as day, and it was heartbreaking for me. And so that is a big revelation there. He says, when you are the attorney, you are representing a client. You are the client. So if the judge hates you, your attorney hates you, right? So then he said that, Helena was turned over to him, and he was supposed to just like kind of make sure. I know what it was. They didn't want her to speak. They did not want her to be recalled. And she was a smart woman, and she was in a very bad situation. And she got talking to Jerry Leonard, and he said something to me, said something to Helena and he said this on the stand, and it's amazing. He said, Helena, how come you can remember everything that happened before 12 midnight and after 4 o'clock in the morning on the night of those murders, but you don't remember those 4 hours on that particular night? And she said, what? He said, how can you remember not remembering? And she got it. She got that, she trusted him. Like, okay, because that makes no sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I'm not clear about her lawyer. She said something. She confessed something to her lawyer, and the lawyer was able to withdraw attorney-client privilege. But what did she say to him, though?
Well, he didn't. He's known this since 1979, and he was allowed to break the privilege in 2012.
To say what, though?
To say that Helena confessed to him and told him she was there.
And does he have notes or anything like that from his meetings with her?
He did not have. He signed an affidavit,
okay.
And then he got up on the witness stand. I mean, that is not the kind of thing a lawyer is ever going to forget. That a key witness in a notorious trial admits their guilt to you, and you're not allowed to tell anybody. He went so far as to she came back to him and said to Mr. Leonard, what will happen to me if I tell you I was there? Because she'd begged for immunity, and Blackburn threatened her and said, not giving you immunity, and if you say on the stand what you've told me in this office with Jim Britt present, you will go to prison for life. And scared her to death, of course. And all these people corroborated that this happened regardless. Excuse me. Jerry Leonard said that Helena came back after that thing about how can you remember not remembering?
Right.
And said, what would happen to me? And he said, I am your lawyer. I will do whatever, it's my duty to do what's best for you, but you've got to tell me the whole thing. And then he, on the stand here in 2012, he said the whole thing that she said, it's not as bad as people think. I was there. I didn't hurt anybody. Things got out of control. Greg and these other men, they went crazy, and it was horrible. We thought Dr. MacDonald was dead. The phone rang. I mean, all this corroboration from a lawyer, an attorney, her attorney, who was breaking the attorney-client privilege at the request of the Stokely family, for God's sake. Why would he say that? You're not going to forget that. And it corroborates what Mr. Britt said about the threat. It corroborates what Mrs. Stokely, Helena's mother, said. She used the same words. I was sitting in front of her, and she said they went out of their minds. Used the same words. There's at least, and so forth.
All right,
and he
Kathryn.
said to her, I will write out your Fifth Amendment rights, and if you are recalled, this is what you say. But she was not recalled because the defense couldn't help her, and the government didn't want her back up there, so she was excused. But can you imagine if she'd gotten up and pleaded the Fifth?
That would have been great. Listen, we only have about 2 minutes left. Now, I want to follow up on this and do some more shows on this. And you said you had some experts like Cyril Wecht. And so describe who else we can book to do more shows on this topic.
Well, without speaking to them, but just my take on what is that of I am certain Dr. Wecht would be very glad to talk with you. Dr. Ron Huff, who is the top of the criminology department at UCLA. Brandon Garrett, who is the head of the law school at University of Virginia and wrongful convictions.
Kathryn, we're out of time.
Dean Strang and Jerry Buting,
we're out of time, Kathryn.
Case.
The website
all these people are supporting my husband's innocence, and
the MacDonaldcase.org is the website. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Ed. It's emotional.
I know. We're out of time, Kathryn. Thank you so much. I'll call you off the air, okay?
Yes.
Thank you, sweetie.
Bye.
Okay, well, there we go. Kathryn MacDonald. The website is themacdonaldcase.org. Okay? And there's a donate button on there, and there's a lot of case facts and all kinds of stuff. Links. There's a really good documentary that just came out, too. Not just came out, but is out. Fatal Justice. Is that the one? No, not Fatal Justice. False Witness, I think it's called. Could be Fatal Justice. I just watched it today. Anyway, what a long day. Coming up after this, we have... What the hell's going on here? Coming up after this, we have William Ramsey coming on. With a guest, Elise Soper, S-O-P-E-R. I have no idea what it is. Cryptid Antiquarian. I have no idea what it's about, but we have that coming on. And then after that, we have Doug Campbell with the Dallas Action. I've been talking to Kathryn off the air, and she does have a whole list of guests we can come on. I like to do some more shows on this. The rest of them will probably be in the member section. Okay. Next week, we have that guy I was telling you about, the Scores guy. I'm looking forward to that one. And we got a couple of shows in the can, too, that we can play for Friday night. So we'll see what's coming up. But I do have to take a week off. I'm going to be taking a whole weekend off coming up in March because I'm going to be helping Vic with her, what do you call it, her debate. I got to go there and judge a debate, and I got to go there and drive her back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So, if you like today's show... Member section is what keeps us going, keeps us running over here. It's OppermanReport.com. You can send me a year subscription, $65. You email me directly, OppermanReport@gmail.com. You send it by PayPal. I'll give you the rest of this month, 5 days, and another 13 months on top of that. Okay? Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. A lot of fun, guys. A lot of fun today.